We've got some major tech drama over this weekend.
Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. I just enough. People are. I think there's a lot of people who would love to buy OpenAI shares. I don't think you would want to sell.
Including myself.
I
Including
think there's a lot
myself.
of people.
That's spicy. Let's break it down. My name is G, and in this first episode of Boston Founder Radio, I wanted to go through this interesting moment that occurred on the BG Squared podcast and take a look at the overall environment of AI, specifically generative AI, some of the big players in the space, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and go through who's leading, who's not. Does it warrant that level of a defensive, in some people's opinion? Others, convicted, a little bit cocky response by Sam Altman over at OpenAI. Let's go through it and go through the full clip of Sam Altman's response to a question that I think in his mind he takes a little bit of offense to, but to most people, including me, I think it's a reasonable question. So here's Brad Kirshner asking the question. Then there's Sam's response. Also, Satya Nadella from Microsoft was also on the podcast, and he chimes in as well.
So I think the single biggest question I've heard all week and hanging over the market is how can the company with 13 billion in revenues make 1.4 trillion of spend commitments? And you've heard the criticism,
First
Sam.
of all, we're doing well more revenue than that. Second of all, Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. I just enough. People are. I think there's a lot of people who would love to buy OpenAI shares. I don't think you would.
Including myself. Including myself.
People who talk with a lot of breathless concern about our compute stuff or whatever that would be thrilled to buy shares. So I think we could sell, your shares or anybody else's to some of the people who are making the most noise on Twitter, whatever, about this very quickly. We do plan for revenue to grow steeply. Revenue is growing steeply. We are taking a forward bet that it's going to continue to grow, and that not only will ChatGPT keep growing, but we will be able to become one of the important AI clouds, that our consumer device business will be a significant and important thing, that AI that can automate science will create huge value. So, there are not many times that I want to be a public company, but one of the rare times it's appealing is when those people are writing these ridiculous OpenAI is about to go out of business and, whatever. I would love to tell them they could just short the stock, and I would love to see them get burned on that. But, we carefully plan. We understand where the technology, where the capability is going to go, and how the products we can build around that and the revenue we can generate. We might screw it up. This is the bet that we're making, and we're taking a risk along with that. A certain risk is if we don't have the compute, we will not be able to generate the revenue or make the models at this kind of scale.
Exactly. And
let me just say one thing, Brad, as both a partner and an investor. There is not been a single business plan that I've seen from OpenAI that they're put in and not beaten it. So in some sense, this is the one place where, in terms of their growth and just even the business, it's been unbelievable execution, quite frankly. I mean, obviously, OpenAI, everyone talks about all the success and the usage and what have you. But even, I'd say all up, the business execution has been just pretty unbelievable.
So just to look at things from a personal perspective right off of the bat, right? I'm just trying to read a little bit of body language and how the conversation goes. First off, I think that in this podcast, Sam's expectations for it is that this is supposed to be a friendly podcast with one of his investors. There aren't going to be any hard-hitting questions. It's supposed to just pump up, make the company, OpenAI in this case, look good, feel good alongside Microsoft, and prepare for their upcoming IPO. And I think that he was taken aback by what in his mind probably is a question that he's probably answered a lot of times, either in separate private investor meetings or in public, as this is a recurring question of how, a company with, and look, we're playing with big numbers, so I know to a lot of people, it's crazy, right? Some of these big scale numbers, right? But a company with, and let's be generous because he did push back on the $13 billion number. Let's just say that, hey, we're 10xing the number, right? $130 billion in revenue. Well, he has put forth 1.4 trillion in capex spending. So we do have to think about, okay, like in most startups, and everything goes back to the fundamentals. What is a startup's runway? How much cash is on hand? How much money is the company making to warrant that $1.4 trillion capital expenditure, capex spend that has been put forth by OpenAI? And a lot of other public market companies are taking these commitments as solid, right? Solid forecasts to their earnings. So this isn't just about OpenAI. It's also about all of the other ecosystem partners, right? The pickaxes and shovels, which is the GPUs, NVIDIA, right? You're also extrapolating with some of the other companies making their own chips, right? Which might be, AWS via Amazon, they're making chips. Google, they're making their own TPUs, right? And so, people are trying to use the comps across. Like, okay, there's a commitment to be able to purchase a certain number of GPUs. We can extrapolate demand to other companies as well. There's also the data center, which Microsoft has been taking the side of, well, we're not 100% sure about demand. So we're going to be renting GPUs and not going forth with too much capex spend in creating data centers. That's my understanding of kind of Microsoft's position. You might be seeing other companies like Oracle getting a bunch of capex commitments from OpenAI, and then in turn saying that they're going to invest more into building data centers, and in turn buying NVIDIA GPUs. And I haven't heard anything about, Oracle GPUs being created or TPUs, them creating their own chip infrastructure. But potentially that might be something that them as a data center provider might be thinking about. And then lastly, just we need to think about, okay, we built an entire startup industry predicated on the fact that we are tapping into, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others APIs, and the health of these APIs have downstream implications to a broad number of startups who rely on not just the stability and performance and efficacy of, OpenAI's models, Anthropic's models, but how healthy are they, right? And if we see any structural issues within OpenAI, and look, Sam has really pushed back against that, that's saying that they're in a good, healthy business position. Well, hey, there's OpenAI, there's Anthropic. How much can we take from, Anthropic, Claude, Perplexity, all of these other AI service providers, right? A lot of them are turning into that, not just frontier model labs, but actually providing services. OpenAI wants to create physical devices. We'll see how that works. And with Anthropic, right, again, also with the public markets thinking and trying to make these comps, Anthropic has also made commitments to, utilize AWS. So, how OpenAI is using Azure and OCI, Anthropic's doing the same thing with AWS. So I think it's a reasonable question to ask of one of the leading AI model makers and service providers to answer. Hey, how do you feel about, the fact that you have this big capex spend upcoming and the revenue just doesn't seem to line up to it to date? And he got, in my opinion, a little bit defensive. Some people were saying that he might have been joking, telling Brad Gerstner, a prominent investor, decently prominent investor, to like, oh, you can sell your shares if you're not convicted. And to me, that feels very defensive. To others, I guess they felt like he was joking, whatever. It's up to interpretation. I can't read his mind. I think some of the body language from Satya was telling. He kind of dips his head down and is kind of thinking. And, I can kind of read that one or two ways, right? It's an awkward situation and he's just, reacting to that as a human, or he's interpreting it as a mistaken PR and kind of as a someone who is actually, from a public market perspective, a very disciplined and well-spoken leader and executive, to kind of see someone say something and something that can be interpreted as defensive and really, in my opinion, and from others that I've talked to, kind of a bad look. Him kind of being like, oh, I wouldn't have done that, right? And kind of bowing his head, keeping somewhat of a poker face, but I think just bowing the head, to me, right, kind of expresses that second part, but it could just be like a, this is awkward and I'm bowing out for a little bit. But, he also comes back after Sam's first part defensive response to then trying to give an answer, but then also having some more defensive pieces, not just about like, oh, if you don't believe in us and you can sell your shares, but also, I really just want to go public, or one of the reasons to go public is so that people can short it and he can show them up, which reads a little bit more cocky and arrogant, kind of mirroring someone he's had a public spat with, Elon Musk, in a way. But just having that string, and then Satya coming in after with the very polished politician speak, giving support to ultimately Microsoft's 27% investment in OpenAI, right? Trying to shore that up a little bit with a little bit of polished politician speak, if you will, right? So just some things to note there. And overall, I just think that, Brad Gerstner actually came in. Sam had to leave, I guess, 30 minutes after that question, about halfway through the pod. He left, and don't know if that was a reaction to the line of questioning. They had a bit of a back and forth, cordial discussion afterwards. So maybe not, leaving on bad terms, if you will. But, Brad had to come on and continue on and say, defending his line of questioning as something that, ultimately even I agree is an appropriate question to ask. And here's the clip.
Hope we get it right. I got to drop off, unfortunately.
Sam, it was great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Congrats again on this big step forward, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for letting me crash.
See you, Sam.
Take care.
See ya.
As Sam well knows, we're certainly a buyer, not a seller. But sometimes, I think it's important, because the world, we're pretty small. We spend all day long thinking about this stuff, right? And so conviction, it comes from the 10,000 hours we've spent thinking about it. But the reality is we have to bring along the rest of the world, and the rest of the world doesn't spend 10,000 hours thinking about this. And frankly, they look at some things that appear overly ambitious, right? And get worried about whether or not we can pull those things off.
And so ultimately, with a lot of things like this, and this is someone who, currently is at the top tier levels of, the industry, someone who's the public face of a lot of startups. And, I think a lot of founders will be trying to take lessons. And to me, I think that, the saying that pops up into my head when I hear this is, be who you can afford to be. And Sam has certainly, along with his co-founders and the team at OpenAI, have built a behemoth. And in his mind, right, he is willing to, kind of take that position that, some people may interpret as cocky, arrogant. I also see some of the things that he's discussed today as a little bit insecure and defensive. But to others, right, bold, confident, willing to take a stand against others and just trying to protect himself. Fair. And look, it's a really hard job being the CEO of even a small company. Can't imagine, right? A company that, is really leading at the forefront of something. And if he's really excited and truly is excited about AGI and what the possibilities of, artificial general intelligence can offer, not just to the world, but as a business model, well, as he says, this is one of the opportunities where he feels like this company can go public and, potentially make an economic and worldly difference. And so really this is one of those like hallmark startup stories, if you will, and ways in which you would describe like what a top tier founder would look like. I would just say that I think that a lot of people might be taking interesting lessons from this. To me, right, going back to be who you can afford to be, like, he has obviously put himself into a position to do this, right, and be able to probably in private meetings, if he's so bold as to say this in public, right, just literally tell investors, like, if he gets a hard line of questioning nowadays, like, hey, if you don't like what I'm doing and how I'm working, sell the shares. I've got millions of buyers lined up, ready to take it. Another aspect of this is, look, can he do the same thing in the beginning? I doubt it. At the beginning, he's probably fresh and hasn't faced that much scrutiny to the extent that he is now. It's just the normal founder level of scrutiny, if you will. Like, I don't know if this business is going to exist. Oh, sounds interesting. Want to see some more, right? And that level of scrutiny is a little bit different. And he had backing in a lot of different places. Obviously was prominent in the YC space. So in San Francisco and in that ecosystem, he's quite prominent. So he had a lot of backing from Elon, famously, and amongst others as well. And so ultimately, the things that someone does at a later point and at a later stage probably is going to be completely different than how they were at the beginning. And they're less visible when they are in the beginning, right? And I think that a lot of times, right, public scrutiny, public pressure, being out there, the fame that comes with being a successful entrepreneur can weigh really heavily on people. And so they start acting a little bit differently. I mean, even, someone whom, Sam Altman is been compared to as kind of the opposite of, but I'm slowly seeing them kind of converge personality-wise, is Elon, right? Elon Musk, how he dealt with a lot of the scrutiny that came from his time at Tesla, right? I think how he dealt with it in the early stage, right? Being more thoughtful, emotional about it, right? From when he confronted Bill Gates about having a short position against Tesla. And then later on, showing people up in SpaceX, a little bit more of an edge there, if you will. And, playful, having the Boring Company and creating the Not the Flamethrower, right? And, it's like all in fun and jest. And then things started probably weighing on him. And I think one of the prominent events for Elon was the Thai cave rescue, right? And him kind of having a public, spat with someone, calling him, I believe, a pedo, right? And going to court over it. There was a lot of public backlash to that. And I think he's never been the same ever since. And now with Sam, I think there are certain things, I don't know. I'm not going to really touch into some of the personal stuff that has been brought up about Sam, whether or not they're true or not. It's not up to me. Nothing's gone to court, so don't see anything there. Obviously, there are also things that have gone to court, right? Lawsuits, New York Times, individual lawsuits from authors and media creators, and then obviously what happened with the board trying to push him out, and Elon trying to, say that, hey, he stole a nonprofit and in trying to create a for-profit company out of it. I think that he's probably under a lot of pressure. And so in that, has built this different persona. And I'm sure, if people who have known him for a long time probably see something different. So in my opinion and what I've kind of come to understand, even though I'm an East Coast guy and I have, been brought up in the Boston ecosystem, right? From my experience and working a lot on both coasts nowadays, in San Francisco and now in Boston, right? There is more of an edge on the West Coast, right? And more of a willingness to be like, hey, if you're an investor, you don't believe in what I'm believing in, you don't see it, then let's move on, right? It almost feels more mature, because I think in Boston, a lot of people take that personally. Like, what do you mean you don't believe in what I believe, right? Or, from the founder side, right? Like, I need to try to convince you, right? Like, what, this isn't rational. Like, what I'm doing makes sense and, is needed for the world. Why don't you agree? I got to convince you of that position. I think that's a very East Coast mentality. And I think everyone who knows me knows that I also don't believe in how East Coast investors work, where a lot of it is, let me scrutinize this, break it down to its base components, and if there's anything, that's even mildly wrong with it, it's a red flag, and, the deal's off, and, these guys are frauds, right? That's very often what it seems to be, right? And I think that, in the different spaces and in the different ecosystems, right? The thing that can be taken away is, I think it's very mature of someone to say, hey, this investor is apparently not aligned with me. They're giving me credible pushback. I don't think that, it makes sense to work together. In this case, I think that it was a reasonable question, and to have a defensive response in a public environment like this, something that Sam Altman can afford, but for a regular founder, not so much, right? If this is a valid question, you need to be able to intelligently answer it. And if in your mind you've intelligently answered it and they still push back in a way that you think is unfair and unreasonable, I'm going to trust, founder's judgment that, hey, this investor has gone to a illogical conclusion about the business, and there's just no convergence here. You got to cut it loose. I think that on the West Coast, people are more willing to do that. On the East Coast, it's like, oh, I gotta play missionary, and I gotta convert the investors over to my religion, if you will, right? And on the flip side, right, like a lot of time wasted on the East Coast, where it's like, yeah, I can never see how this will ever work. I don't, invest in founders, and I don't believe in this, so whatever, right? And that just happens all the time. And that's why I barely recommend East Coast investors anymore to founders. It's just a waste of time. Like, hey, most companies, be who you can afford to be. Like, oh yeah, I get it. Most of these ideas and most of these startups, they're not in a great place. But like, again, are you trusting the founder to eventually figure it out? Because every business on paper doesn't make sense at some point in their journey. Some people figure it out earlier than others, right? But it's all about potential, right? What is the ceiling of things? What is the floor? How much can we massage and push people in a certain position, right? And, I think that some investors, right, see themselves as just, hey, we're here to throw, darts at the wall. There's no amount of movement that we can make on founders. Nature versus nurture, right? How they're born is just how these founders are. The idea, once it's come up and it's been presented to us, there's no leeway, there's no movement, right? I just invest into what is in front of me. Sure. Okay. That's your way, and I'm not your LP, so, it's up to the LPs to judge that performance. And, there's a lot of people who can never see nurture either, right? Like, oh, I do believe in the founder, like I try to invest into founders who can create and do stuff, right? But then they never allow the founder to actually have any latitude. that never works out. And so ultimately, right, when we're looking at like lessons learned, right, and me kind of going on a rant on these different things. But look, in short, right, how you interact with investors and how someone who is put themselves forth in a prominent position like Sam has and how they're influencing other founders, right? I just think that it's a bad look. And, some people, when they're in the position like Sam, can feel like they can afford to put investors in their place and, walk away. Certainly fair. I think that for other founders, right, it's finding alignment and understanding, what is a reasonable question. You need to have a good and proper response to it. You can't be defensive in the same way that Sam was. And I think that his response at some point after, some of that conversation talking about a hardware product or, how, he is taking a risk and, people need to understand that, he's making a strategic bet. He can outline how that bet looks and what are the potential returns. And I don't think he really answered anything about the capex spend, other than saying that the revenue is going to make up for it with some potential projects down the line. Obviously, it's in a public environment, so maybe he's not comfortable with answering some things. But, ultimately, what most people could take away is, right, like, that was a reasonable question. You need to have a proper response to it, even if you don't like it. And if there's continued pushback, like if Brad asked a follow-up that, was like, well, how much runway do you have? Or, like, are you sure? Right? It's like, that's starting to get a little bit too much, right? And I can certainly see Sam's response if it were to take one extra step like that. But, it's hard, right? Being a founder is hard. And, you try to be on top of your game for everything. I think a lot of people were dinging Sam on this. And in my mind, right, being a founder is hard. And I certainly think that this was a mistake and something that hopefully he will learn from and not descend further down, because I promise you, public market analysts aren't going to be any nicer than a investor of yours on a podcast asking questions. And so, yeah, I think that, ultimately, at the end of the day, right, expressed it. You got to have all the answers to these type of questions. And, if someone, starts leading down to, putting you down or there's just no alignment that you can sense, right? They just don't get it. You save everyone's time. Cut the meeting. Say, hey, I just don't think that we've reached alignment. I think we have a difference of opinion, and so, really appreciate the time that you gave us on this call, and we'll be seeking investment in other locations. And I think that's a very mature and reasonable response. And I think that experienced and good investors will understand it. And if they get offended and if they feel like, high and mighty on these guys to think of this, I think that reflects more on the investor. So it's just my thoughts on the situation. First inaugural episode of Boston Founder Radio. A little bit of a half rant, trying to steer it back into learning. And, hopefully everyone found value from wherever you're watching. I hope that you're able to share this with other people. Hope that it brought value to you. Stay tuned for more. We're going to be doing live shows late night with G, where I kind of go through some different news stories, and I'm trying to pin down what the exact date of it is, just because as I'm coming back more into the city, into Boston, going to different events, and there's got a bunch of things going on. I'm going to try to figure that out. Also, scheduling, right? Trying to bring my friends on. The timing is a little bit difficult, right? Because I'm going to try to do late night. So it's probably generally around 10 o'clock where I'm finished with work and am more free to be able to do the live stream. And, we'll think about how we can edit some of that content down and get it out the day after, if you will, if you missed the live show. And so, yeah, ultimately, a new journey, a new step in trying to do more content, more thoughts as a founder and investor, trying to help educate more founders, but also, give some of my thoughts of different situations. And I'm definitely not right all the time. Want to be humble about things. So if you have a difference of opinion and have a different context or different perspective on things, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below and engage. And so, thank you for watching. This is the first episode of Boston Founder Radio, and I don't really know the way to sign off, so I'll just go with my normal sign off for everything else. If G can present things and educate people, then so can you. Go out there, try to spread some knowledge to different people and understanding, and get everyone all up on the same page. We're all trying to be really great founders. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded and kept, should be given freely. And so hopefully that's what I'm able to do for you. And if I'm able to do that for you, please pass it along to someone else. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.